The killers forced her to dance for them. He got an A in homicide. Burned in the trash. These are some titles you would see in big bold letters on the front cover at the newsstand if you were in Mexico in the 80s. This is about Alarma. Death and the photography of it for education, documentation, and frankly even entertainment has been around since damn near the invention of the camera. And far before yesteryear's shock sites and Rotten.com, there is one figure that really stood and paved the way. Now, I have somehow become the unofficial messed up magazine guy here on YouTube and keep getting into these weird little gore pits, and y'all have been asking for this relentlessly, so here it is. Let's just get right into it. In 1963, tabloids in Mexico would see things they had never come close to before. A mix of gruesome, up-close crime scene photos of murder victims, disasters, and of course, explicit adult content. Even the 1,000th issue of Alarma being a collage of corpses all bashed together to cover the entirety of the page. Accompanied with intense or at times comical captions, such as Satan's Mom, Human Jigsaw Puzzle, and famously, he kidnapped her, raped her, and killed her with a gun. Alarma is just one of many, but without a doubt the most influential of a magazine genre known as red presses or red notes. These are magazines that focus solely on crime. And by the 1960s, the overtaking and even demand of photographs over written stories in media and news completely changed how news and red notes were made. Alarma was launched on April 17th in 1963. Large, bold, high-contrast images of mutilated corpses of women, with them looking for and choosing explicitly the most bloody, gory, and gruesome photos they could possibly find, accompanied by very short text pieces about what happened to them, or even just 7 words to dumb down to the most brutal, eye-catching, grabbing, vicious story they could possibly think of in 7 words or less. At its peak, they were selling up to 2.5 million copies in a week, particularly in 1985 when the Mexico City earthquake killed 10,000 people. So, gruesome photos of the dead, paired with snappy captions that make you want to look at it. Sounding familiar to anybody? Like all magazines and gore content houses, there would be certain stories that really piqued them into the public knowledge. And in particular, with Alarma, it was the case of Los Pocantis. There were 4 sisters running a prostitution operation. The sisters were accused of at least 28 murders of young girls they were trafficking. The story had everything a true crime junkie, gore lover, or even a regular gossip would want to read about. Because outside of the murdered girls and buried fetuses, because everyone they killed they just buried in the backyard, there actually was a double edge to this story. And that was the fact that all of the sisters were paying off local officials and police. They all knew exactly what was going on and were being properly bribed for it. With hearing about the horror stories of humans being sold and traded like livestock, a journalist for Alarma had gotten into contact with 2 of the sisters after their arrest, where they started divulging all the information they were keeping to themselves about paying off the police. This was quite the scandal to have on their hands, and the fact that Alarma was the first and really only source coming out with the newest updates, because they had a personal in now, it was even referred to as the equivalent of a magazine soap opera by a later editor of the magazine. The case did so much for them that during this time period, they increased their print run from 140,000 to 500,000 copies a week. People were waiting for their weekly issue of Alarm to come out to hear what was new. They published just about anything they could get on this. I think they estimated it was 2,000 photos in relation to the crime. Not just the buried, murdered women and girls, but also just everything involving these sisters now. This had become the hot topic for everyone to discuss. And insider information wasn't the only exclusivity you would want to have. On top of this would be photos no one else was able to get. And Alarma had just that. In particular, one of Mexico's top television hosts at the time, Paco Stanley, was murdered in cold blood outside a restaurant on June 7th in 1999. Now, this is all about eyewitnesses because this crime is still kind of technically unsolved, but it's believed that he got up to excuse himself to take a phone call, he went into his car, and 3 men arrived with weapons and began firing at him, ultimately shooting him to death within his own car, and Alarma was the first one and the only one to get a photo of him dead within his car, and they blasted it, of course, immediately right on the headline front page of their magazine. And to this day, there's only been 1 man charged, and that wasn't until 2011 where a man, Louis Vega, has been charged in the death, but this man was such a big host on television that multiple networks at the time, when they got the message, like, stopped and announced it. So Alarma having the photos of him on the front cover was a very big deal for them. As well, they would have photos of the deceased popes and, like, everything in the way of, like, they're just so brutal. And of course, the question everyone wants to ask, how are they getting the photos? They had their own independent photographers. They were not going through the normal system of getting crime scene photos. They were having people show up trying to race against cops, taping off scenes of crimes or wheeling bodies away. And this came through having various contacts who'd call them first. Even readers of the magazine contacting, going, hey, I just saw a car crash. You guys better get to X, Y, and Z. And on top of that, in a very Nightcrawler-esque fashion, they would listen to the police radio lines, and they would immediately start going if they heard calls for ambulances or firearms or anything that they thought they could get a picture of. I say Nightcrawler-esque because actually Vice did a 3-part thing a long time ago, which is crazily on YouTube, even though I want to say, if you go to watch this, warning, there is photos of dead and murdered people in these videos, and they're here, but that's besides the point on what's allowed and not allowed on YouTube. But they actually follow one of the photographers and go to crime scenes with him and see how they do it. And it's interesting because, as I mentioned, Alarma was not the only Red Note and not the only magazine doing things like this. So all these guys kind of all met up together and hung out, and there was this sense of camaraderie. I don't know how to say that word. There's this sense of teamwork in a way where they would actually help each other. They would all, like, be like, yo, we're going to this place, like, you better hurry up, or even trade photos with each other's at times. And part of this was due to the fact that different magazines wanted different stuff. Alarma, of course, wanted the worst, the nastiest, the craziest stuff. Same with another magazine called La Prensa, where I think the guy verbatim said, they want pictures so bloody that if you shake the magazine, blood drips out of it. There were other people who actually spoke in this article, in this video, and they themselves said they wanted to do something a little more artsy and less gruesome. So it's very interesting to see that these dudes literally just pull up to scenes viciously and aggressively start snapping photos away. And of course, with that, it's also interesting to see how different police forces react to them, because there were recounts of people being beat up by cops or bystanders for trying to take pictures. The police putting covers over bodies immediately, or even moving cars to obstruct view for photographers to take pictures. But then later on, we'll see ambulance drivers literally ask them directly if they wanted to get in to get better pictures of wounds. And of course, everything I'm discussing in all these parallels, all of this is stuff that was happening in the 60s to the late 80s. And this is all far before the time of Bescore, Ogrish, Live Leak, Rotten, and everything of the type. And they were the first to say, we're a news organization, and, you know, if someone got shot 9 times, they got shot 9 times, and they're showing you someone got shot 9 times. To be fair, they weren't really ones for exaggeration, and with the timing of their release, they were pretty good at verifying almost all police information before they actually put stuff out. And this is what one of the editors actually claims is why they never got sued. I mean, I also think it's the culture. I don't think people are really doing stuff like that down there, but I mean, of course people sue people, but you know what I mean, is they actually never got sued, which I think is crazy, because when we talk about shock sites, especially on here, case after case, government after government trying to get these sites into trouble, and Alarma just never had that issue. But of course, this doesn't mean people were okay with this necessarily. Like I mentioned, there were multiple reporters saying that they had been beaten up on the scenes of the crime, and even Alarma themselves would have a journalist be murdered, including one, Roberto Garcia, who's exposing a group of thieves. He was shot 9 times after not accepting bribes to not report about what they were doing. And with this whole okay and not okay and condemnation stuff, we do have to touch on the fact that Mexico has a very different culture and relationship surrounding death and things like this, and it's not like how it is in America. I reference America because my analytics say most of you guys are from here, but I know some of you aren't, okay? But, you know, Mexico-America relations. Mexico has a much more close, intimate, and I would say realistic relationship with death. It is something that happens, and unfortunately in specific parts, like in Mexico City during this time, it was normal to see death. You would see death all the time just because of how it was as a country. Whereas in America, it's very separated. Like, I personally, I've never seen a dead person, and I know a lot of people who haven't, but my friends who are Mexican and go to Mexico and stuff, like, it is part of the culture to be just more closely connected. Of course, Dias de los Muertos and all of that, but just in general, when you go to these smaller rural areas, especially during these times, there was just so much more street violence. But even with its death culture being closer, Alarma was still considered grotesque or overtly disrespectful by many. But of course, humans are humans, and there is curiosity, and without a doubt, that is one of the biggest selling points surrounding gore, as I've mentioned time and time again. The biggest thing to get someone to look at something is curiosity. It became luxury violence. No longer did you have to picture what happened. You had the pay-to-view of being the first-hand witness of beheadings, tortures, anything another human could do to another. Alarma was the perfect storm of extremely graphic photos, popular crimes in the news, a sense of humor beyond dark, and was fairly cheap to grab a copy of. When asked about why people like Alarma, its director Miguel Rodriguez said, quote, "People's interest in the misfortune of others is mainly due to two things. The natural morbid that humans have for the grotesque and the forbidden, and because there are so many people who are poor, who do not have money to eat, but who see a magazine like Alarm." He says, "Well, I'm not that. This one is worse, because he's dead. We have a very bad reputation that we are yellow or sensationalist, but no. If we tell you that there were 20 stab wounds, it was because the expert confirmed it. There are so cruel facts that if we tried to invent them, we could not get such terrible cases. And it's incredible how naughty you sometimes have to kill someone, that we don't need to do more," unquote. And Alarma was kept in business for 23 years at this point. It was just part of the culture. It was a staple to go to a newsstand and see an Alarma copy, to see someone who was burned to death, or even murdered children just on the front cover. It was normal. I've seen many people reference the fact that they would go to the barbershop as kids and they would just have copies laying around, or once again, you just go to newsstand and you see it. Interestingly enough, it became so popular, it was being shipped out to different countries. I know for a fact there were newsstands in Manhattan who used to keep them tucked behind Playboys, and people would say they always sold out of them when questioned about them. And shout out to amazing band Bruguera, who actually, their first studio album, that photo they have of the head is actually a photo that was featured within Alarma. And I do plan at some point to make a video talking about the entanglement between metal and gore. If that's something you guys are interested, please let me know down below, because if I don't have to sit through more pictures like this, I'd rather not, but I think it's very interesting how intertwined they are, especially once we get into the whole subgenre that is gore grind. And as I just said, it was around for 23 years. And this was fact, because this is one of the extremely rare, if not one of the only cases where gore was actually shut down by the country's government, or at least specifically Alarma was shut down. This was in part by one of their biggest competitors, Impacto. Their owner was partially involved in Mexican politics, and in 1986, Mexico would make a change to Article 29 of their printing laws that stated, any type of periodical publication that shows naked bodies or scenes of violence would be considered ography, and its sale should be inside a black bag. There was a lot of factors that went into why this ruling happened and why this was the kiss of death for Alarma. One of them was the fact that they just had the biggest publication run of, I think, the entire magazine's career surrounding the Mexico City earthquake. And this following year that they changed these laws, Mexico was to host the World Cup. And I think they kind of thought it's not the best look to have the most gruesome and dark magazine available on the streets for visitors. They wanted to paint a better PR picture. And Alarma really was the only one shut down and held accountable. All these other red notes were still around, and I think this is partially due to the fact that Impacto, yes, was involved and they were a competitor, so they wanted them shut down. But also, no one really went as graphic and, messed up as Alarma. The captions on the big headlines of Alarma magazines were just rotten. They were vile. It literally, that's why I keep making these comparisons to Rotten.com, because if you remember Rotten, they would be those messed up titles where you'd be like, what? And you would click it, and it would be something horrible and vile. That's essentially what Alarma did, except it gave you the preview on the front of what you were actually going to look at. But they would just be dark humor, sinister things, and I don't think that was going to be the best look. So the government took it into their own hands, and even though other people protested for Alarma, it did not matter. Alarma was officially shut down, at least for the time being, in 1986. And also the whole part of adult content thing being part of why it was banned, it's actually kind of clear. Once you start opening Alarmas, almost, or I think every single one included a centerfold of a female model, which the director said he did, so the readers had something pretty to look at after looking at everything horrible. They also weirdly had crosswords, and there was this section called the Cuban Corner, which, bizarro. Women from Cuba would send photos of themselves and like little pen pally things to run in the magazine, and interestingly enough, Alarma was not sold in Cuba. So it's believed most of the women in sending stuff off didn't actually know what type of magazine their photos were being put in, but they were focused on getting out of their country. So this was a way to find someone and leave. So there was a whole section of just women like a dating app. It was like a physical dating app. We'll say that. Okay? It was like that. There's centerfolds. There's a bunch of stuff like that. So being able to push Alarma into the category of an adult magazine was not a big stretch. As well, they created an offshoot called Cases of Alarma, or Cases Real, where they covered cases previously mentioned in Alarma, but layered it out like a photo novel of the very adult variety. And on the note about romance and relationships, the bread and butter of most crimes you would see were crimes of passion. People killing their husbands, their wives, the lovers of their partners. It was the scandalous cherry on top for readers, as well as creating this dangerous edge and even stigma to adult contact with others. Women causing deadly feuds, being profiteers of murder, between lovers and rampant homophobia were constant themes in Alarma. This wasn't just the magazine, this was the culture of media at the time, dramatization and extremes. This was what the population wanted everywhere, not just in Mexico. And once again, Alarma had no issue with holding back and saying the craziest stuff possible about people and things, especially when it came to homosexuality and non-typical gender expressions. Because Alarma came to you like it was just a dude. It didn't present itself with that objectiveness or non-bias of an actual news site. They really spoke to you with their own biases clear on their chest. Particularly in the case of Los Morositos, which the editor-in-chief coined the term himself, which essentially means effeminate man or effeminate boy. It's like this mix of words to get this across. And this was photos of people who are labeled as men dressing in female clothing and makeup of what was objective of gender stereotypes at the time, okay? I'm trying to say everything right. Please don't get mad at me. And these were unlike what you would typically see in Alarma. These people weren't mutilated, dead, on fire, anything of the above. They became the poster child of hate and mockery and stigma. They were criticized by Alarma and society, stamping them as dangerous for any reason under the sun. And this wasn't a one-off. This became a staple of Alarma. Almost at least once a month, there'd be a giant, large photo set and articles written about these people. And I think it gets overshadowed by just all of the death in the magazine, because of course it did, but this was something that happened for like 23 years. And it started a media frenzy and broadcast, exposing people and their lifestyles that they may have not wanted to, or even realized would be as exposed as they were, which unfortunately did in fact lead to murders and suicides from. Alarma did not only dehumanize and sensationalize the dead, it also did the same to the living. And this ended up being the part of its demise in a way, was having things like this, having adult content, having things that could be construed to crucify them for. But of course, like all things in the world, this would not be the end of Alarma. 5 years later, in 1991, Alarma would return under a new name. It became known as El Nuevo Alarma. As I just mentioned, crimes of passion were what was the staples of reading Alarma, but once they came back, everything started shifting. We reached the 2000s, and the stories that now worked and sold papers surrounded the narco world and drug traffickers. No one cared about seeing the 100th photo shed of someone shooting their scorned lover that they caught with their wife, when there were such intense crimes happening. Particularly, an issue that brought a bunch of attention back to Alarma was the fact that during a nightclub, men of a gang came in, held their weapons up, made everyone get down, and threw at least 5 severed heads onto the dance floor. This, of course, was a threat. They left a note on cardboard saying, The family doesn't kill for money, it doesn't kill women, it doesn't kill innocent people, only those who deserve to die. Flipping through the years of Alarma is to be seeing the first-hand escalation of the drug war and gang violence. No longer was it the days of men lining up and shooting them, or vehicular accidents. It kind of became a game with each other of who could be more violent and more disgustingly depraved. Images of severed hands and heads, the skin peeled from men's faces, organs dragged out onto the streets. These were common images of narco killings. As well, the increase in disappearances of reporters and photographers covering these areas. If you've been unlucky enough to see videos or anything involving it online, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There is the whole section within the overarching gore category of cartel videos, and these are commonly referenced as being the most intense, the worst, the craziest, the most depraved stuff you can see. Literally, videos of men cutting open the chests of other live men, taking hearts out to take bites of it. This is not an exaggeration. These are the types of things that cartels would do and craft videos of to bring fear and notoriety to their gangs. They wanted to establish their place within their work and social rankings of their city or even country. And Alarma wasn't the only one exploiting or taking advantage of these gruesome murders. The cartels and drug lords themselves used it as PR to everyone leaving handmade signs or banners with bodies labeled with threats to fellow gangs, or anyone who would cross them. I've even seen photographs of them writing on the entire shirts of victims they've killed to leave a message to someone. One thing is certain, the message, no matter how it's said, is always the same. Be afraid and don't step on what's ours. Drug crime violence became, and still is, what's feeding the machine of gore. With the undeniable boom and new tools of websites, it's estimated that just in 2006, 28,000 people were killed or died in relation to drug crimes within Mexico. It has become a never-ending uzumaki of death and torture and depravity. Photos and videos inspiring others into copycat kills, or even the thought of one-upping what the last guy did. The men in charge wanted everyone to see their crimes. This wasn't something seen that often before. It parallels terroristic attack videos, even at multiple points it being reported that drug traffickers would kidnap journalists to force their news outlets to show footage they want out there. Whereas, say, a food brand has to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars to get a slot of advertisement on the news. These drug lords would pay by sparing your life. After this initial return, Alarma could not revive its pre-existence audience. Between other magazines filling the void that was left, and the now new cyberspace of gore, people had a new craving, and they wanted to see videos. They wanted to hear it. They wanted to hear blood gurgle, and they wanted to see how the blood splattered. Photos no longer cut it, just as the photos were the replacement for the written text. In 2014, after several failed attempts to get advertisers, they decided to pull the plug on Alarma. 1 month later, the director, Miguel, who had been there since he was 17 years old, would die of a heart attack in Mexico City. The mix of contents, crimes, and visuals has left Alarma the poster child of red notes in Mexico, and as their editor said, if there are no pictures, there's no stories. Our readers like to see pictures. As I said before, Alarma stamped itself into the culture of gore, macabre, crime, and even just news in Mexico, frankly, for generations. There are people to this day who saw it once as a child and still hold this memory, and its legacy will, I think, just always kind of continue on in a way. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Have you ever heard of Alarma? Is this your first time hearing about it? Like I said, I've briefly heard about it, but when I say you guys have been asking for this, you guys have been asking for this. So, you know, I thought it'd be good to bring it here. And yes, as always, let's talk about it in the comments below. I thought it was kind of trivial for me to sit here and explain why people want to look at gore. I feel like we've done that too many times on the channel. Also, we're about to hit 100,000 subscribers, which is so super crazy. I can't thank you enough. So please, once again, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Members see videos early and get to vote on what videos we do. So if you want to vote or just get videos early, make sure to become a member. I have the link down below. As well, I have merch linked down below in all my social media. I'm Darby Valentine on just about every single platform, so make sure you are following me on everything. I am starting to do TikTok lives, so if that's something you want to do, make sure you follow me there. Instagram, I do Q&As quite often about things, so if you want to interact with me further than, you know, this situation, because I'm not in the comments like that, make sure to follow me on other platforms. Also, since we're discussing death, which I think we always do on the channel, I got a tattoo I think you guys might like. make sure to also go follow the person that did that. And with that, if you like this video, you'd probably like my video about the deep dive into shock sites. With that, I'll see you next time. Bye!